Welcome to the masterclass, which explains toxic metaframing. In a few minutes, you will recognize very quickly who is toxic, who not, and who to concentrate on or not. This masterclass is a gold pill. If you listen to it completely through, you will be absolutely amazed, and it will completely change your life. So it's not going to be easy in the beginning, but bear with me and listen to it while driving or before you go to sleep or something. Just listen to the whole thing through and you will be absolutely amazed how much it changes your life. So, what is toxic metaframing? Okay, it's basically a word, a neologism which I coined in order to quickly recognize toxic people and know how to deal with them. Okay, this is literally like your social life will completely change after understanding this. Your relationships, your friend life, your business life, everything, people you meet on the street, whoever. So basically, I'm going to start at the very bottom. Our biological survival mechanism has two forces, survival and procreation. There's a third one, which is universal consciousness, universal love, but that for most is not relevant because most people are not universally aware. Their consciousness is not high enough to recognize this. Okay, so we're gonna concentrate right now on survival and procreation. So if you look at people, they're mostly motivated by fear of death and by fear of pain and the sexual need to procreate. So survival and procreation, those two forces. Now, procreation has a lot to do with sexual hierarchy, just like in the normal biological world, where you look at who has the higher sexual value by having, for example, more territory, being stronger, whatever, fighting out the territory, and thereby getting the benefits of procreation. Now, in the human world, it's much more complicated than that because you can't just, fight for the territory in most cases. You have to use psychological mechanisms. And here comes something interesting. So, there is, you have what I call libido empowerment and libido suppression. It's basically whether you allow your joy and sexuality, that energy, and if you allow that sexual energy to roam freely, or that joy to roam freely and to live that daily life with that energy. Or some people, for many reasons, social, religion, a lot of different reasons, they suppress this energy. So that I call libido suppression, the other is libido empowerment. And as technology changes our lives, and as religion and society changes, sometimes people are more libido empowered, sometimes less libido empowered. And it depends like how high your energy level is and what you kind of want to do in life. If you want to, for example, have, as a man, lots of women, as a woman, lots of men, or if you're content with just one person or no one, then you also have this kind of like when you're a teenager, it's mostly everything that's before teenager, it's mostly connected to joy. Like, oh my god, we're going to Disneyland. Oh my god, I'm gonna get ice cream. Okay. Oh, today's no school. So that kind of like joy. And that's libido empowerment for children. And then once you get to the testosterone, estrogen phase where it becomes really strong, then it turns into also sexuality. For boys, the highest testosterone is around 14, 15. That's where it becomes very pronounced. And that's also the reason why you will see a lot of toxicity, toxic metaframes from that age group, especially on the internet where nobody's watching them. So, toxic metaframing is basically when somebody's libido is suppressed and doesn't allow themselves joy or sexuality for whatever reason, and they're not conscious enough of what they're doing, their own kind of misery in life, their own lack of joy in sexuality, they will make others responsible for it, project that onto them, and try to suppress them. And it might be anybody. It might be to people in business, in family. It might be children that do this, children that do it to parents. There's, siblings. Everybody can do it. And a lot of people do it. And then there's direct, indirect, verbal, and non-verbal toxic metaframing. A very typical toxic metaframe in a very traumatized relationship to parents would be if the father says to the child, "You will never amount to anything. You're a loser. You are dumb." Or siblings say to each other, and so forth. Now, here comes the interesting thing. The person who lives their maximum libido empowerment and maximum joy doesn't have a reason to toxic metaframe. So it always comes from a lack of joy. The interesting thing in relationships when this happens, it usually stems from the partner starting to be interested in other partners and not being happy with their own partner. And thereby they project their misery onto their partner and make them responsible for a lack of joy in sexuality. Now, the best thing in a relationship is to write down, and the best is if both do it. They both write down what would give them joy and more sexuality. It doesn't mean necessarily more sex. What it means is like that kind of libido empowerment, the opening of that energy. But it can mean that. And both make a list, and then they compare the list, and they see which they must give the other person to do freely on their own, and which of that list they do together. And when they do this, the relationship is automatically saved. You will notice that all bad relationships start and end with toxic metaframes. It's always, up to the divorce, is always toxic metaframes. It's basically, you don't do this, you don't do that. You never... a typical thing about toxic metaframings also is that they're generalizations. Also time-wise, like you always do this, you're always like that. For example, my father would say, "You're just like your mother." Okay, that's also a toxic metaframe. It's because he is sensing something that gives him lack of joy, lack of sexuality, lack of empowerment, and he feels like he needs to suppress the other person. Now, since they're direct, indirect, and verbal and non-verbal, I have to explain that there's some things which are not toxic metaframes. If you generalize, like for example, all people of this country are this and that, okay? That's not a toxic metaframe. A toxic metaframe is always something direct, from person to person, in real life, on internet, wherever. It's never a generalization over a whole country or whole community or something. That's not a toxic metaframe. If you feel triggered by a generalization, like for example, all French people are such and such, and you are French and you feel offended, then that's not because of a toxic metaframe. That's because you identify with that, culture too much. And it's important to say, because there's one thing is identification with something that's too strong, whereas the toxic metaframe is more a reaction to an intent to hurt you. Okay, so if someone toxic metaframes you directly, their intent is actually to hurt you. They're not loving you in that moment. They're actually hating you in that moment. And the sooner you recognize this, the better. And I'm going to give a little bit more examples, like types of toxic metaframes with the verbal, non-verbal, direct, and indirect. But the most important thing is understanding that all of these kind of generalizations, insults, or intents to press you down, to push you down, are toxic metaframes, okay? And once you recognize them, once you understand this, you will recognize them more and more. And here comes the interesting thing, that around 90% of people in the world are toxic metaframes, because most people are unhappy. And actually, the more we go into the future with technology and modern society, more and more people are becoming unhappy, because what they want, what they desire is over here, and who they truly are and what they're capable of is over here. So for example, you want very beautiful women because you see them in porn, but you're actually a fat guy sitting at home eating chips. So your frustration is becoming even greater. And that's all the trolls, all the haters on internet are basically toxic metaframers that are very strongly in their libido suppression and libido, and not in their libido empowerment. And you will notice that if you allow yourself, it's a decision-making process, because the moment you allow yourself for higher joy, higher sexuality, and following your highest joy and following your highest sexuality, you will notice that you care much less about, what other people do or think, and you won't criticize them. You're much more focused on your own life in that way. And you hold the power within you. Almost all situations, unless you're maybe in prison, you always, even there though, you have a lot of choice in terms of like, sorry, you have a lot of choice in terms of like choosing things that give you libido empowerment. You could do, for example, I call it this TNT, is train and telegraph. Train and telegraph is for guys. For women, it's the same. Like, train your body, get fit, and then telegraph that you did that. And you will notice that more and more of the opposite sex is interested in you, and that will give you that kind of libido empowerment, the joy from that part. Doesn't mean you need to sleep with them. It's just like that, even that attention feels good. And women, a lot of times, know this inherently. They can play with this very well. So even though they're in a relationship, they play with that because they enjoy how other guys are interested in them, although they're in a relationship. And women are experts in that. They're playing this all the time. It's like non-stop, because they're enjoying that sacral chakra energy, keeping that, alive. And but joy is also very simple. As sometimes you're like, if you for a month you didn't eat any sweets or something like that, and you only watch like very closely your diet, and then you maybe cross like a bakery, and you're like, oh, today I'm gonna get this, and watch how happy you become, just by deciding right now I'm gonna allow myself to have this, cake, whatever. Not that you should eat it all the time, just that when you feel that tremendous joy, if you allow yourself this, that's also libido empowerment. Now, in relationships, in general, okay, if you notice someone toxic metaframes you, and the thing is, toxic people toxic metaframe you pretty much early in the getting to know them. You'll notice very quickly, and one of the things is like, how do you deal with toxic metaframers? You have three options. One is to completely cut yourself physically from them, no cold turkey, no contact with them. The second one, not even explanations, anything, just walking away. The second is, or minimizing contact as much as possible. The second is reflect onto them what they're doing, but that only makes sense if you're already invested in a relationship and you think they're conscious enough. Or you can over-toxic metaframe that. That's what most people do. Most people actually over-toxic metaframe, which is kind of stupid. So it's basically when one person says you're a dumb, and the other person says no, you're dumb, or no, you're the most dumbest. And then you will see that often it's the beginning of a physical fight, for example, between siblings, or much worse, wars between countries. And the trick is, by the way, you know how to find a narcissist very quickly. If you call them out for being a toxic metaframer, they always get aggressive, always. Whereas the conscious person will be like, oh, this is interesting, okay, let me take a look at that and learn from it and change my behavior. The opposite of toxic metaframing are authentic, simple compliments. And you can turn any kind of toxic relationship, if both are conscious enough, into a functioning positive relationship if they learn to give authentic, true, small comments. But at the same time, each of those partners needs to come into their joy and sexuality. Now, it depends, of course, what people want. If one wants to, sleep with many women or many men at the same time or whatever, and the other person doesn't want the partner to do this, it becomes complicated, and then you need to find a compromise. What other things are there for joy or sexuality to exist in the partnership? It might be sports, it might be whatever. There's tons of things. Or visit, a tantra master, like I'm a tantra master, and just allow the partner to do this. And it's interesting, like very conscious relationships usually allow the other partner to do a lot of things, with the knowledge that if they suppress that joy of sexuality, then the relationship will actually be hurt by that. Now, once you understand toxic metaframing, you will see that it happens everywhere, all the time. Whether it's on the internet, watching my videos, someone else's videos, they'll comment and they'll toxic metaframe. And some narcissists and toxic metaframers are specialists in disguising the toxic metaframe. So they have like a logical, perfectly sound reason, and give you like a paragraph of criticizing something in your video, but it's a fact and it's not really attacking you yet. And then at the very end they'll say, that's why you're a loser, or something like that. So the toxic metaframe will always be disguised somewhere there. And the thing is, you will see that the dynamic of what I'm talking about is always present. You will never not find it in a toxic person. You will always see toxic metaframes in a toxic person. And it's not your responsibility that they find joy and sexuality in their life, but you can, share this video for people to understand it. So when I recognize myself that I'm projecting my misery, if I have misery, onto others, I'm like, okay, where's my joy? Where's my sexuality? What do I need to do? And there's a couple things that you can do which are very, very easy. For example, but it's very individual, like for what gives joy or sexuality or the opportunity for sexuality or just sexual energy or joy to someone can be very unique, can be very different from person to person. So everybody needs to look at their own. And for example, a direct but non-verbal toxic metaframe would be like if someone who like scans you and is like, tss, that would be a non-verbal direct toxic metaframe. And the direct one is clear. The direct verbal one is clear. Like you're a loser, or none of your content makes any. No video that you ever made makes sense. You never managed to get anywhere in life. Those are kind of like toxic metaframes, direct ones. Those are kind of the harsh ones, the most obvious ones. There are indirect ones, but sometimes I forget them. I had the example for the indirect ones. So direct is basically saying it to someone directly. Indirectly might be, for example, if they're not yet speaking to you, but they're maybe speaking to someone else, but about you, but they're next to you right away. So they're right next to you and they'll be like ignoring you, for example. Oh, that's a good one. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is a non-verbal indirect one, because they're not directly, not gaslighting, ghosting. So you might be standing next to them, but they're not paying any attention to you, although there's no reason to not acknowledge your existence. That would be a non-verbal indirect one. So those are kind of like, you'll start to see those variations of the direct, indirect, verbal, non-verbal in many different situations. And look at it like in your own behavior, but look at it also in the behavior of others and start noticing it. And the interesting thing, it activates a certain feeling inside of your body, and this certain feeling is kind of like, you start to notice it more, and it will be like a barometer for and a signal for when somebody probably is toxic metaframing you. But be careful, like I said, not everything is a toxic metaframe. So if a black dude comes and just randomly spurts, all white people are shit, but it's not directed towards me necessarily, it's just something that he says and I get offended, it's not because of a toxic metaframe. But if he looks at me and is like, man, you're like the shittiest whitest guy that I've ever saw, then it's a toxic metaframe. And here comes an interesting thing. The perpetrator, by the way, the worst toxic metaframe is, it's the narcissistic one, is my life is worth more than yours. My emotions are worth more than yours. My impulses, my desires are worth more than yours. My thoughts are worth more than yours. That's why I can kill you, for example. That's the worst toxic metaframe is the killing of someone else. It's basically you're projecting your hate so much towards them that you want to remove them from this world. I was about to say something else about toxic metaframing. I've really become an expert in this. I mean, I coined the term, but I noticed how this happened is I was looking at people and I was like, why do I feel bad with these people and why do I feel good with these people? And I started, especially sitting in silence, kind of vipassana, I started to see patterns of certain behaviors, and I noticed that it lacks a word. You can say insults, but it's more than insults. The toxic metaframe explains the whole kind of thing a little bit better. And that's why it's a toxic metaframe, because it's not trying to push you down. Like, it's not saying, by the way, facts are not toxic metaframes unless they're meant to push you down. So if somebody says, well, you are bold, okay, well, I'm bold, okay, so it's a fact, so it's not a toxic metaframe. But if someone says, oh, you're like the boldest dude I've ever saw, you have no chance with women ever, then it's a toxic metaframe, for example. What else? My advice is to physically detach from anyone who toxic metaframes. In relationships, you can try to have two conscious people trying to explain it to each other and be conscious of what you're doing and return to your joy and sexuality and to return also to compliments. I noticed, like, when I explained this to some people, if the partner didn't understand it and didn't want to understand it, for example, if they're narcissist, then it won't work. Both need to be conscious. So 90% of people are toxic metaframes. It's becoming more metaframers. They're becoming more and more. And concentrate only on the ones that are not toxic metaframers. And if you can, I get a lot the question, like, what about, at workplace or something, or in the family? Then the easiest thing is to have as little physical contact with them as possible. As little as possible. Like, absolute minimum. The best is complete physical cut. Ideally, changing, workplace, whatever, if necessary. Because, and why is the whole thing even relevant? Because, you know how there's like this experiment where when you talk bad to plants, they kind of like fall into themselves. Have you noticed that, a lot of diseases come from bad relationships? And they don't have to be intimate relationships, but like, I know people that died and became severely sick because of toxic relationships they were in. Because they didn't recognize those patterns. And they didn't have enough self-love to escape from it and understand there's another thing. Okay, let's say you're together with a toxic metaframer and you constantly toxic metaframes, that's the perfect description of a narcissist. And those people are the Formula 1 drivers of push and pull, gaslighting, blame shifting, shame-inducing, talks. And they'll know, for example, to be super nice because they'll reel you in again and then be again bad. And then they'll reel you in again, be nice, and then they'll be bad again. And they'll play this game. And because it's in what I call asymmetrical relationship in which you are seemingly dependent on them, emotionally, financially, whatever, You stay in the relationship and you wonder why they behave like that, because you feel like you're in love, but they're not truly in love. They're just toxic metaframers, narcissists who need to play with the victim, basically. And once you start to see that and it opens up to you, then you don't feel like you need to stay with that person. And then especially if you let go of the fear of being alone and enjoying your own company, then it will be much easier that after recognizing toxic metaframing, to leave that person. Because as that person is the Formula One driver of manipulation, verbal and so forth, and toxic metaframing, you'll notice that you don't have a chance against them. It's like, as you know, when somebody is, playing a sport since they're like 4 years old and become professional, you have no chance against them once you recognize this pattern. It's not like you can say, because every fight will not work because they're not conscious enough. And to test this out, if they're conscious enough, explain them the concept of toxic metaframing and see how they get aggressive. The more aggressive they get, the more you will see that they're actually narcissists, and that will show that they have zero consciousness to grow above this kind of automatic behavior to project their unhappiness to the outside. What you can try is also to tell them, like, do something that gives you joy, that gives you, more sexuality, more joy. And for me, for example, one of the things that I do is, there's a lot of small things. Well, I love good food. I love being in nature. I love the opportunity to maybe have a girlfriend or maybe have girls. So the more I the more I show myself on YouTube and social media, the more opportunities basically I have. But there's also other things which actually function as an indirect. The interesting thing about Tinder is, and I want to make a video about this, like a lot of dating applications, because of the way they work with the anonymous matching, not matching, they work actually as kind of like constant, indirect, non-verbal toxic metaframing. Because while you say, okay, I want to meet you, the other person on the other side says, I don't want to meet you. And of course it's in their right to not want to meet you. But if you constantly experience this, they're obviously judging you in some way because they don't know you. So they're judging you superficially, and they think they're worth more, they're better than you actually. So a lot of women on these dating applications, they're actually toxic metaframers. So you don't even want to meet them. Because, for example, matching you and then writing them like one sentence, and then they write once back, and then you write again and don't write anymore, that's a toxic metaframe actually. Of course they have so many messages, but it's still a toxic metaframe. So recognize that, and so that behavior, and that's why it's so important. This is the thing with the plant. If you talk bad to the plant, is it hurts. It hurts like if somebody, takes a pan and throws it onto your head. And if you constantly subject yourself to this hurt, you're actually falling possibly into disease and unhappiness. And blame shifting is the classical, like, where the narcissist will say, where you're like the stupidest person on this planet. Okay. And why are you always doing this? Like, you're always doing stupid stuff. And you respond to that like, yeah, but look at you, like you did this, like this is the perpetrator the perpetrator is the first toxic metaframer. The first person to do a toxic metaframe is the perpetrator. The person who responds to the toxic metaframe is always the victim. They might respond with a toxic metaframe, but they're actually the victim. And the narcissist will perfectly throw it back to you. They'll be like, yeah, but I don't have a problem with people. It's you that has a problem with people. So my behavior is absolutely fine. I don't have a problem with anyone. You have a problem with me. I don't have a problem with anyone. No one has a problem with me except you. So they'll do that kind of thing. Yeah, so you'll start to notice it more and more. and it will completely change your life. If I have more to add, I'll make this like a part 2, but this is like where I'll go with this for now.